Captain Keshel, you're the perfect example of this young vanguard, this young generation that's rising up, that's got the spirit of John Paul Jones, not just going in harm's way, but saying to everyone, we've not yet even begun to fight. Fresh off the heels of your contact with Donald Trump, Captain Keshel, welcome to the JSlay program.
You bet. Yep, Steve Munisteri said I was too young to produce this intelligence, but 10 years ago, I was putting warheads on foreheads in Afghanistan.
We need to just call them what they are. These people are cowards. They're intellectual midgets. They have absolutely zero understanding. I could literally go to Nashville right now. I can fly out to Nashville. I mean, you could be like, we're going to whatever bar, and 100 people will show up.
Guys, welcome to JSlay Made in the USA. Thanks for joining us. And I am here today with Captain Seth Keshel, the man, the myth, the legend. Seth, thanks for joining us today.
You bet, Jeremy. I appreciate you having me on. Definitely enjoy our shared baseball background.
Absolutely. We've got to give a shout out to our old friend Cody Overbeck for making this connection.
Yeah, Cody was one of these guys you never knew what he had in that bat until he started swinging it, and he really was a very pleasant surprise for the Rebel baseball team back in those years.
Yeah, I'd say the man's an undersized power hitter.
He just swung a heavy bat. We knew it when he was a redshirt freshman. He came out there, dropped a couple home runs in his first few games, and he developed into a very good middle-of-the-order bat for a team that was nationally known. Obviously was within a breath of making it to the big leagues like you, had a very good career, and he's become a competent professional as well and still a friend after all these years. Yeah, well, that brings us to kind of your background and your baseball and how we got connected. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to give a little plug for you here, Seth. So Seth has had explosive growth on social media, but especially Telegram, one of the free speech apps you can get out there. When I first was connected with Seth, this was just a couple weeks ago, he had 50,000 followers following his basically research around election fraud county by county in this country. Well, now he has topped 100,000 followers. And then just the other day, August 3rd, President Trump released a memo on Seth, on your work, stating that he was very proud of the work you'd been doing. And actually, let me just pull it up real quick. All right, so this is the statement by President Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States of America. Highly respected Army Intelligence Captain Seth Keshel has just released his report on national fraud numbers with respect to the 2020 election. I don't personally know Captain Keshel, but these numbers are overwhelming, election changing, and according to him, could be even bigger in that they do not account for cyber flipping of votes. They show I won the election by a lot. So I could go on, but Seth, when President Trump came out with that just a couple days ago, how did that hit, man? What'd you think about that? I was in your old stomping grounds in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was having lunch.
Yeah.
And my phone started going zip, 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 zip. And I've got 20 people texting me about, hey, the boss just put your name out there. And it's some people that have been working on these election projects with, other people I grew up with. And I had posted a meme on my Telegram a couple of days before I got some grief over, because apparently now when you have enough followers, people even take memes seriously. So you have to really put sarcasm out there if you're trying to have some humor. Oh, yeah. But I was skeptical at first. I wanted to make sure that wasn't something that was just made up to make me look stupid. And it sure wasn't. I mean, it's all over the president's website and all over the other pages. So I was absolutely shocked. I mean, I was shocked, but I wasn't shocked because I knew that he'd been reading a lot of my work back in November and December. And
Do you think he was reading it through Telegram?
Well, it wasn't on Telegram in November and December, but a lot of the work that I was producing for our cases, he was aware of.
Okay.
In the circles that I worked in. And President Trump's statement the other day was certainly it was shocking to hear, just because you have a president talking about your work. But it was really neat to see, because I put a lot of hard work into these maps. Yeah. And I try to, there's states where I'm like, hey, Biden won this state, and there's a lot of people are like, well, I don't think Biden won any states. Well, I like to deal in reality, and the reality is what led me to pick 2016 accurately.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second. So as me, late to the game and late to knowing who you are, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around all the work that you've done. And I was like, man, how did this guy, what kind of credentials does he have? How did he develop this notoriety among the massive following of people out there that want to know, was it a fair and true election? But then you just shared about 2016. So your work and your effective ability to gain people's trust happened back then. Speak to 2016 and the predictions you made.
2016 was a bit of a weird year. I'd been involved in local grassroots politics in Texas for a couple of years, and we'll probably talk about that when we get into background. But I've understood politics probably better than most for a while. But as far as self-taught, really understanding elections, beginning in 2016, ripping apart all the old documents and books and going through all the voter rolls and the history of all these states, that's when I began to put this together. Because in reality, what you have is you don't have a national popular vote type election. There is a national popular vote, but it doesn't impact who the president is. So you have 51 separate elections that determine our president, 50 states plus Washington, D.C. They all have different characteristics and quirks. There's this thing called political science. Every 8 years or so, the winds change. And you have certain trends that can remain in effect regionally until something causes them to reverse, which I've mentioned recently on War Room. But in 2016, the media tipped me off. So this is great because we're going to be able to go baseball analogies to the wall here, Jeremy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So look, you know when you're in the box, right?
Yep.
And you've got a pitcher on the mound, and he's developed a blister on his finger.
Yep.
Right. And you're watching the release point come out, and you see that he's favoring one of his fingers, and he's got it off the ball. Because
well, your eyes were that good?
There's a lot, so that's the thing. Ted Williams had those kind of eyes, but you can tell, so the pitcher, or he's digging in his glove, like the pitcher's tipping off what he may be throwing, or you have the pitchers that slow down their arm when they're throwing a changeup. That's why an effective changeup, you have a pitcher who's going to have the same arm speed fastball changeup, right? So the media tipped off Ohio. They didn't realize what they were doing, but you have these 27-year-old journalists that don't know anything about history. And they said, well, you know what? It looks like President Trump's going to carry, or Donald Trump at the time, 2016 candidate Trump is going to carry Ohio by 4 points. So polls are generally useless, and I've explained that at length, and we can get into that. But polls, if they're favorable for a Republican candidate, particularly one like Trump with a lot of media hate on him and not the whole support of the establishment party, if you have him up in 4 in Ohio, in a state that's typically a 1-point race between an ice cream cone and a kick in the neck, then something tells me that he's going to win Ohio by bigger than 4 points, probably 6, 7, 8 points. And it wound up being 8.5 in 2016. I went and researched the regional area. So we're talking about Pennsylvania and Michigan, Indiana. And I started looking at how these states typically land in relation to Ohio, assuming that Ohio is going to be in Trump's column by a pretty solid amount. And my numbers suggested to me that Pennsylvania and Michigan were going to be trending hard to Trump and going to Trump, especially Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania gives us party registration info, which we're going to get into. So really, by looking at the media's own numbers and testing those numbers with reality, I began to develop an accurate picture of the 2016 election, because there are a number of states that just aren't in play for either party. So you've narrowed the field quite a bit to where you're looking at a dozen states maybe, and then you can guess them much easier. So most people that pick the election should at least be able to get 2/3 of the states right.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, when I was thinking about what's Seth's credibility, what's his credentials, and, you know, we've covered some of that already, but it starts with who somebody is a lot of times. What are they naturally good at? And you and I were talking about the difference in the kind of ball players, and I'm one who may not have noticed all the little intricacies. The wiggling of the glove, is the guy tipping his pitches. It was once said to me, if you want to be a great hitter, you better be as dumb as shit, or you better think you're the shit. One of those two, you know. And I think I was maybe one of the other most of the time. But you know, there's another kind of player who does really grind on all the details and thinks through numbers, thinks through statistics. And I think you always were that way, right? I mean, you have a gift for numbers and making those make sense in real time.
Sometimes those insights are in hindsight 2020. Like you said about baseball, like Ole Miss has a great program, as we've talked about, and it's another Southern program just like Georgia Tech. So even though we never played Georgia Tech when I was there, I'm sure you knew about us,
right?
And we knew about you. So we had Ole Miss was famous for great power pitchers. Most of our pitchers at Ole Miss are big guys with big arms, low mid-90s fastballs, even back 15 years ago. But we were also in some ways predictable. So a lot of times our lineups would be shut down by these little lefties that threw 84, you know, flip curveballs, pitch backward. Ole Miss pitchers, these big thoroughbreds throwing 94 miles an hour, fastball, curveball, changeup. we're not throwing same hand change ups at people. So like if you're just doing math on that, so if our righties are not going to throw a change up at righties, and right-handed hitters realize that our guy doesn't have a curveball that day, then you're dug in on fastball nonstop. So this is math. So you have a 33% chance of receiving any pitch. You take away the changeup, it's 50-50. Then the curveball's not there, it's 100%. You're receiving fastballs all day.
Yeah. So you were able to really break down the tendencies, and actually, to be fair to myself, as I grew in the game and became a more mature ball player and hitter, I began to really look at tendencies. What does this guy typically throw on a 3-1 count or on an 0-2 count? Where are his misses, things like that. And I think that there's a great parallel between those tendencies and you just looking at tendencies that have held true for a long time. And we're going to get into some of your maps and stats that show, hey, these things are completely, I think a good word is implausible. And when you have implausibility time and time and time again, pretty soon it's well, this is not possible. It goes from implausible to impossible. So we'll get into that. But so you guessed or you predicted every state correctly in 2016. You've gathered all these followers on Telegram in this election, and you've also been collaborating behind the scenes with big names like Sidney Powell, General Flynn, among others. How did those connections happen, and when did they start?
I was asked to replicate my 2016 performance in 2020. It was really for fun. And I decided to invest a little bit of my own money. And Southerners may not like the fact that I'm gambling, but okay. If you're investing in the stock market, you're probably gambling too.
Right.
But
right.
I put about $8,000 on Predicted, where you had very good odds if you wanted to bet Trump for Pennsylvania, or Pennsylvania for Trump, I should say. You could go 3-1, and I'm looking at numbers. It's like Trump for Pennsylvania. That's like asking if you think Mississippi's going to go for Trump. And the numbers for Trump in Pennsylvania registration-wise, especially with the performance of Romney improving in 2012, Trump flipping the state in 2016, and then what I'm going to show your audience in Pennsylvania in 2020, you're a fool not to double down on Pennsylvania. So I threw $8,000 in the Predicted market, and to make sure that I was being wise with my investing, Michigan, Wisconsin, other states, Georgia, I documented everything. I made sure that
this was all for fun, right? This is not General Flynn.
For sure. This is before all this took off. This was my own personal stuff, and really kind of like just bragging rights.
Sure.
Okay. So, and I started looking, and I'm willing to say that the baby's ugly if it's not there. There's a number of states I didn't have Trump winning at all. Like Colorado is one of the states I didn't expect Trump to win. Now I have other questions now that I've dug through a lot of different numbers in many states, including states that Trump lost and probably legitimately lost.
Yeah.
But so I invested all this money, and I had all these charts and graphics, and I learned stuff that I never knew before this. Like I've got so many data points that you'd be a fool to not at least have some skepticism about this election, regardless of whether you ultimately think it was completely rigged or not. So election night went down. Florida was my leading indicator. And when Florida trended heavily Republican for 88 years, Pennsylvania and Michigan have matched the trajectory of Florida to the right or to the left. So I'm like, well, this thing's on ice. And I'm watching the numbers roll in on Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin live on election night, blowout numbers, just like Georgia.
Okay.
And then, of course, we all went to bed. Michigan and Wisconsin were flipped overnight at about 3:45.
And you called Georgia, just so I heard you said just like Georgia blowout numbers. So before we all went to bed, I remember this night well. Was Georgia in a blowout situation for Trump winning before
yes.
midnight?
The New York Times is not useful for much, but one of the things they do well is election coverage. So they have a very good dashboard for elections, very informative. It shows you county by county how much vote is out, what the odds of each candidate winning are based on what's left out to be counted. And Georgia on election night was the momentum meter was 98% Georgia's going to Trump. 90-something% of the vote is counted. Trump's up by 300,000 plus. He's up by 7%. My numbers for Georgia suggest Trump won Georgia by about 6.2%. And that was the score that we had on election night. And then, of course, the voting stopped. The counting stopped, I should say. And then it took 3 days for Georgia to be flipped to Biden by just over 12,000 votes.
Now, a lot of people would hear you say that and think, well, I watched a video that showed like these briefcases being pulled out, or they called them suitcases. And then, late in the evening, they started to recount after the voting was supposed to be called for the night and all the poll people were supposed to have gone home. They kept going. Does that play into this or is that it does?
Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Okay.
My data is a 30,000 foot view. So if I'm looking at your baseball ledger and I see that you have a couple series in a row where you guys played Miami and then you played North Carolina and Jeremy went 1 for 24.
Not a good one.
I can't necessarily see all of your at-bats, but I could probably make some assumptions that you're not seeing the ball well. You're probably exercising poor plate discipline, or you're going against some really tough pitching. So I can just look at these disparities in the data because every county trends a certain way. There's only 6 different types of counties in the U.S. and the way they trend. Okay, so I can understand based on the column performance of Trump where his performance is, and how the counties typically trend where these are going to be. And if people want to challenge me, I can produce any sort of information they want, including my complete county by county scorecard on Florida, where in 2020, I was one of very few people who predicted Florida would go to Trump by over 300,000 votes. And I have that county by county. So this is a much more accurate way of assessing elections than by polling.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, yes, Ruby Freeman scanning ballots multiple times is one of the ways these numbers get to be the way they are.
Yeah. And let's see, there's 2 questions that come to mind. So the first one is you kind of already answered, but I want to restate it. So all of these little video clips that mostly conservatives were finding online, because I think the left, or if they voted for Biden, they'd rather just not see it or say, it was fine. It was nothing. Yeah. Just kind of turn the other way. But you're saying, you know what, even though that may not have been enough to get the courts to pay attention to it, because I think that's where a lot of our hopes were, was, man, maybe this court, maybe the Texas, when they do their lawsuit or whatever, the Supreme Court will look at it. And it kept being not even looked at based on, I think standing was the word. I'm not a legal expert. But what I hear you saying is, hey, all of that stuff was the smoke. And there was fire, and the fire could be found in the data that you and others are putting together.
Elections are extremely hard to challenge. This has been the case even in races that were overturned after the fact. The wrong person has been seated and removed in smaller offices, of course, never in the presidency. And yes, I had anticipated as far back as November that it was possible that court rulings would not be favorable to those bringing the challenges. But I figured at least with something so prominent, at that time, 40+% of Americans believing the election was decided by cheating, I figured that you would have some sort of judicial oversight of this or a case being taken up. I didn't think they would all get completely punted, especially based on the procedural grounds that you've outlined. Right.
Yeah. And, for me, a common man, common thinker when it comes to this stuff, I sort of thought, these people, these justices and judges and whoever it is that decides whether they're going to look at the case based on standing or procedural rulings or not, they're human beings. And everyone around them, especially as you climb the ladder of human society, and these people are pretty high, they don't want to rock the boat because they saw what happened all last summer, all last year with an angry bunch of leftists in the street, and they don't want those people showing up at their house. I think there is an element to that, and an element of fear of, I will be ostracized by my brothers and sisters or peers in my community if I'm the one court that looks at this and uncovers fraud. The eyes of the nation are going to be on my courtroom, and I think no one wanted that.
100%. And okay. These are people with families, and certainly it's the leader of the free world. This is something that we measure time by: the Reagan years, the Trump years, the Bush era. This is a earth-shaking thing. So nobody wants to be the nail that's sticking up, even though you should make the case that this is absolutely something that needed resolution, because now that number has not gone down, the number has climbed. The amount of people in this country who have serious doubts to the legitimacy of the certified results of our election, and that number is anywhere from the mid-40s to the mid-50s, depending on what you review.
Really? I didn't know.
A good estimate, a good ballpark estimate for your layperson out there is that half of this country still doesn't have faith in the certified election results, that they were decided without cheating.
Wow. And I think I heard you say that it's grown. The amount of people that has grown. That's kind of surprising after all. Another thing that got me was after around December 1st, that's when we saw this big tech massive suppression of, if you said anything to do with a fraudulent election, they'd take your video down, They would give you the tag saying false information, of course, by their own fact checkers. And I was like, if you've got nothing to hide, why are you running? Why are you suppressing? Same with the Hunter Biden thing right before the election. That was amazing. That was the first kind of jaw-dropping instance, in my opinion, that happened that I was just like, this is too obvious. This is too brazen.
Yep. So we need to just call them what they are. These people are cowards. They're intellectual midgets. They have absolutely zero understanding of our historical election patterns and data. And the only explanations they have are COVID and high turnout. I can refute your high turnout claim easily based on the primary numbers that Trump and Biden both put up. But for
who are the cowards, Seth? When you say they're cowards, you talking about the big tech giants?
The big tech platforms that are pulling down any sort of opposition viewpoints, because they're cowards that you can look at any number of platforms and still find all the garbage Russian collusion conspiracy theories that even Robert Mueller's committee said was imaginary.
Right.
And now they'll take down anything that challenges not just elections, but medical freedom. That's a huge issue right now. So you are being convinced by the media, maybe not you, but a lot of people are being convinced that the only folks who have questions about this elections are rubes and people that can't add 2 + 2 together. That's not true. You can look through my inbox, and I'm sure there's plenty of people that have looked through my inbox, but my inbox is full of doctors and PhDs and MBAs and lawyers and anybody from any stripe and any profession that is looking to get involved and looking to help. This is not something that's just for your rabble out there. This is a nationwide thing that has confounded many.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great parallel between election fraud and there being a lot of smart people like yourself out there who really have not only questions, but have data to back up their assertions. If you look at it on the medical side, like you were talking about, you got something like that. A lot of people may not even have heard of this because of the suppression, but there was the Great Barrington Declaration, which came out around June of last year, and it was all these doctors globally from some of the most respected institutions on the planet that said, we do not agree with this method of locking down the healthy and masking the healthy and shutting down businesses when you've got this rate of, they went through the data and they said, here's our plan, and they rolled it out through just this declaration. And boy, it got suppressed. A lot of these doctors lost their jobs and livelihoods just for being brave enough to sign their name on the dotted line, because I feel like today, our great filter through which we get our news is all people in cahoots with, and I hate to say the Democratic Party, but we kind of know that that's what it is. I mean, big tech is working with the Democratic Party in a way that they never would have with Donald Trump. So,
it's not so much about Democrats as many people think. The Democrats are just the soup of the day, the flavor of the day, because the Republican Party's base voters, the people that show up and vote in primaries that really decide the direction of the party at the local level, they are now aligned with America first. So it's not really even about Donald Trump, which is what critics of anyone's work that opposes this election, that could be me or anyone else, they say that it's all about Donald Trump. You worship Donald Trump. That's not true.
Right.
But the right is now the one that is open to America first populism. So there's populism of every political ideology. There's left-wing populism. So, we get these left-wing and right-wing ideas. As long as they're ideas that work for the people, that's the whole point of elections, is to decide between the 2 points. You may not like the left-wing points, but they have left-wing populism. But right now, the Democratic Party is not left-wing populist. They're establishment. And they have a left wing and a right wing on those, and they go by Democrat and Republican. So if the Republicans were run by Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush types, and the Democrats were full bore Tulsi Gabbard on the left populist, then the media and the political establishment, all the money would favor the Republican Party.
The only pushback that I would give on that, Seth, and who am I to give you pushback on these topics? But it would be this: from the time I was born in 1982, and I know our history, the higher education institutions, the celebrities, for the most part, the news. If you look at who these elitists, these people who are kind of have almost this either distrust or seething hatred for middle American, hardworking, middle class people, if they're at the top of the food chain, for the most part, they seem to be on the left. So I feel like there's kind of always been the left has been more associated with against the populace. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but I do feel like the major institutions, the higher you go, the further left they are.
Follow the money. Both of the parties used to be establishment. So you had Bush, Kerry, you had Obama, McCain. So you had more lines drawn like that. But now you can see a lot of those oligarchs that you mentioned, they'll back certain Republicans like Adam Kinzinger and people that are backing the political machine against populist ideas. Populist ideas that support – who would have ever thought that America First would ruffle so many feathers where you're actually going to make the economy and all of our policies and our immigration laws – favor Americans. It's an American government. We don't vote for the president of the world. That's one of the greatest things Trump ever said. I didn't run to be president of the world. We're going to be president of the United States.
Yeah, that's right. And there is a great disconnect going on in the minds of it's splitting families apart. And I think this is one of the key issues is we need to understand what populism is, because what it is not is white nationalism. And I feel like if you're kind of in the middle, you might call it white nationalism. And you have these racial ideas that come to mind, like, oh, a bunch of crazy people storming the Capitol building. That's like all you can think of when you think of populism. And that's really a manufactured product, I feel, of seeing that and hearing that from all media directions, celebrities, the magazines on the checkout stand. It's all negative toward what populism is. And I think really it's, in my opinion, populism is an uprising of people who want to have their voice heard. And it's saying it's time to focus on the common man.
It's an acknowledgement that the government today is completely corrupt in every institution, including unelected positions.
Yeah. Yes.
You could fit every neo-Nazi in America in Georgia Tech's baseball stadium. Okay, they make this belief that they make this perception out there for people to bite on like a fishing hook that they're everywhere. But President Trump's probably the worst racist of all time. He has a Jewish son-in-law. He got the highest non-white share of the vote for a Republican since 1960. And his policies created record minority employment and wage growth.
Yep. And
everybody of every people group flourished.
Not only to tack onto that, the money he gave to historically black colleges and universities was almost more than any other president. And
correct.
What was it? The First Step Act. He implemented that, and lots of black lives were set free from prison early. So, yeah, the man's quite the racist.
He's terrible. He's terrible. He trended South Texas and West Texas heavily Republican. He performed better in many counties in South Texas and in some of these working class areas than George W. Bush did, who had great Hispanic support. He almost flipped Miami-Dade County, and he probably did in a clean election.
Wow. Well, let's go ahead and start diving into the data. And I want to start with this, that you work at a 30,000 foot view, but let's jump to 100,000 real quick. So right after Trump's memo came out, I read on your Telegram channel, you said, hey, there are probably 8.1 heavy Biden votes in the first pass. I guess that means your first pass across this nation. So what does that mean, heavy Biden votes?
Trends are the most accurate predictor of an election. And the reason I say that is because what do most people rely on for guessing who's going to win a state?
I guess trends?
Polls. Most people rely on polls. Okay. So this is why you have the media runs around weeks before an election, months before an election, and say Trump's down 25 points in this state. They had Trump losing Wisconsin. Some of these polls had Trump losing Wisconsin by 17 points. So even with the fraud in Wisconsin, Trump only lost it by an eyelash. Way less than a half a point. Yeah. So we're talking about 21,000 votes. And what we have now, though, is these polls used to suppress conservative turnout. Right? That's what they're for. And even when they're done well, even the best pollsters have a significant margin of error, usually 3 points to either side of where this is going to be. So one of the things that limits polling's accuracy today, especially when it's talking about are you going to vote for Jeremy or are you going to vote for Seth, is social desirability bias. You know what it is?
How likable someone is? Or
it's basically if you go into suburban Atlanta or suburban DFW and you start asking people who you gonna vote for, Biden or
right.
Trump.
Yes.
Right. You're gonna get this 43 to 39 kind of stuff, and it might say Biden's up by 4. It's like saying that, Bethune-Cookman's beating Georgia Tech because they let off the game and got 1-0 over you. It's kind of incomplete. You have 9 more innings to play, but you have 18% undecideds. And what happens is a lot of these people who are not strong base voters but are going to vote for a certain candidate, they may not express that even to a stranger, like a pollster. So they may say they're voting for the other person, or they may not give an answer, or they may decline, or they may say undecided. So these polls, even if they're conducted honestly, which they're not, most of them are not. There are some honest pollsters, but even in ones where they're trying to do a good job, you have this bias that goes into where polls can no longer be trusted, especially really in the last 10 years when things have become extremely polarized and toxic politically in this country.
Yeah, and Steve, you know Steve Dace?
I do, yes. I actually was at an event with him in Grand Rapids a couple weeks ago.
Okay, so back when the polling was going on for 2020 and they were coming out with the polls and all this, he was looking into the way that the polling was being done, and he was like, every one of these people should be fired. This is ridiculous. Now, I don't remember what his data points were, but I think he didn't really have anything to lose in saying that. But I really respect his voice, and it seemed like he had a real problem with the way polls were being done.
You should, but they're not going to be fired because they're doing a job on purpose.
Yeah.
The media and polling is a weaponized arm of the deep state and the government to make sure that people have ideas in their head. There's a lot of ideas that are out there that are being put in fruition right now, like Texas is turning blue. That idea has been floating for over 10 years. And now we've had a couple closer elections here, and you ought to see the numbers. We're not going to focus on it on this show, but the numbers in Texas will blow you away. The only reason they're not being talked about is because Trump still won Texas by over 600,000 votes.
Yeah.
Same reason that not many people are talking about Florida or North Carolina, because they were won by Trump. But a lot of people don't ask this question, how much? But back to the point, trends and trajectories have been a deal for all of modern political history, really since 1892. We can go back and look at patterns and trends, bellwethers and stuff like that. This is not conjecture. And when I challenge people, so I've had the AP come after me this week because of Trump's statement about me. And when I wrote back, so I'm pretty salty when it comes to the mainstream media, but I'll put out a statement knowing that they're going to screenshot it and that they're going to do everything they can to make me look bad. And I say, you know what? Instead of trying to have your magicians and sorcerers debunk me, which they actually said they wanted to debunk my points,
That's what
they said. They said they wanted to debunk it rather than trying to offer insight, given that 50% of Americans have issues accepting this election result. That's a fact. Okay. A lot of Americans do not trust the election result. That is a national crisis, no matter who won the election. Okay.
Yeah.
So the AP wants to debunk the article. And what I said was, well, why don't you guys try to debunk this article? And I threw them the 96-mile-an-hour fastball of General Flynn's article that I collaborated with him on about 10 irrefutable points about the election. And I've sent you a couple screenshots from that briefing that we will discuss. And I don't think they're going to take it. And I don't believe that they took it. And those are the things where if any sane individual, which is probably 2/3 of the country, I would consider sane, regardless of left or right extreme. 2/3 of the country, I think, could read this and be like, that is kind of crazy that all went away this year.
Yeah.
That's what the article is. My information is researchable and verifiable. My estimates, some of it seems proprietary, but my methods are pretty straightforward. Every state trends somewhat differently. So everybody seems to think that I have 12 hours to drop in the middle of the day and show them exactly how I got my numbers. Every different outlet in America that wants me to do that, it's just not going to happen. Especially when their goal is to defame me and my family.
Right. Yeah. And that's
because we're using these numbers to brief people who can actually do something about auditing these. And there should be no fear in the audits. You know, if the election results are legitimate, everything's going to stand up. And if I'm proven wrong, it's going to be good for America because our elections are clean. But I don't believe I'm going to be proven wrong. And apparently a lot of people don't think I would either. You'd see more audits.
Yeah. Well, as you said recently, you said a decade ago, I was putting warheads on foreheads with my intel. So a little election fraud should be a piece of cake.
Well, so I need to clarify before anybody comes out and says that I'm doing stolen valor or anything. So I was an intelligence officer. I was in an aviation brigade, and our Apaches did indeed have warheads. We had all kinds of warheads out there, including the kind that will fly into the back of a cave and blow up and cook everything inside the cave, the thermal barrack warhead. Wow. So I personally did not put the warheads on foreheads, but I helped provide the intelligence to show them where to put warheads on said foreheads.
That's right.
And of course, if we can get this right, we can do another Thug Life video of me saying that with you.
We're going to show that. Yeah, you're the intel man, all right? You were not the guy shooting